time has come. I have run out of questions. It's over. The series is canceled. No, I still got some questions from ancient things, because I had the original Q&A with the side of Minecraft series, and then I had the later, like a year later, Q&A with a side of bleh series where I changed the game every episode, which I liked that for. I liked that format for a while, but then I fell off again. I think I fell off because I was recording with Andrew, and we changed the recording day with Andrew to the day I normally recorded the Q&A, and so I just kind of fell off of doing the Q&A on that one because I didn't have a Patreon incentive to like stick to it. So it was just kind of a thing I did when I had time to do it, and since I kind of saw it as optional, that meant it was one of the first things that got cut off. I'm really bad at doing anything besides the basic thing that I have to do every day. Like, a good example of that is the fact that every year I do a video that's like, every game I played in 2015, 16, 17. I did those 3 just fine. And you know how I did them? I did the entire video in one day. I just had a day, like either at the end of the year or the beginning of the next year, where I just hunkered down and did it. But this year I didn't quite have time because I had just moved and things were messy and I was busy and so on with other stuff, trying to make my normal schedule happen. And so I put in a good effort, but I did not finish the video by a fair margin, and went on to do other things. And a bunch of other stuff happened, like I launched a movie commentary series with Bird, which we'll see how often those happen. And then also I had that big revival where all the people that we used to play multiplayer with like years ago we kind of like rebuilt that entire team more or less, which was neat, and that's been keeping me busy and distracted. And so like between all these other things, this one optional task that I keep meaning to get to but keep not at all getting to continues to be completely disregarded and tossed aside. It's a really good example of that idea. I need to finish the every game in 2018 video, but it's normally done like January 1st-ish, and it's already like February 14th is when I'm recording this. I'm recording a little bit early, and this week's a good example of how I can come up with excuses not to work on it, because this Saturday we're doing Twilight Imperium, which means I need to wake up first thing in the morning, drive all the way to where Marty lives, spend the entire day there not doing anything related to my channel, at least not the normal schedule, and maybe streaming that and so on. And it's like I'm preemptively working harder to make up for the day that I know I won't be doing the normal schedule stuff. And so the moment that kind of thing surfaces, I'm immediately like, well, that means I'm not going to be working on the, obviously I'm not going to go work on the every game 2018 video, because I got this other constraint on my schedule to focus on for now. And the thing is that I've had a series of excuses ever since then. Like, I have actually legit made 0 progress on that since that one stream where I showed the process that I go through to make those videos, when I like previewed an hour and a half or something like that of me working on that video. That was the last time I actually worked on the video. That was like a month and a half ago. Like, it's not even that it's like taking a long time. Like, oh no, progress is slow but steady. We'll get there one day. Like, no, I have not even opened the project on Vegas to work on that video since that stream. It's a disaster. I forgot a little bit how I got here. Oh yeah, I was just talking about how the previous Q&A series died. It's the difference between having a Patreon one, where it's like I have a schedule, and I only cancel it when there's like an emergency or I'm surprise constraint in my schedule, whereas the previous one, the moment it just became kind of hard to keep up with doing it, I just didn't do it anymore, because I didn't see it as a thing that had to happen. It's the difference of like which parts of your schedule you decide need to be there or not there. One kind of example is that like I view my let's try slot as being mostly mandatory, and that it's one of the 6 videos per day. But if something goes wrong, or like I just feel bad a given day, like weirdly tired or whatever, I'll be like, and I'll just cross out the let's try slot for tomorrow or whatever, and just won't make one. because I'm like, it's not one of the current series. So if there's any video I can miss out on and people mostly won't notice, it's probably the Let's Try. Because it's not like, today I uploaded Mario 55 and tomorrow I'll upload Mario 56. Like this, like a consistent series that has a progression from front to end where people are anticipating the next episode. Somebody might look forward to the next Let's Try every day. Some people must, because it does, those always do all right as a series. But it's not like the next part of the Let's Try. So it missing a day here and there isn't exactly a tragedy. That said, I think I started the Let's Try slot before 2018 started. And I guess I'll know the total when I actually make the credits for it. But I think I did a lot of Let's Tries last year. I think I got a real big chunk of them done. Which is nice, because for years I was wanting to do exactly that. I've had this issue of getting more games than I could possibly cover basically since day one. So it took me like 2 years to really figure out how to slip the Let's Tries into my overall schedule, which ultimately was just I did it by deleting one of my pieces of my schedule and making that the Let's Try one. I probably missed a decent chunk just in that I took Let's Tries off the schedule for the entirety of October so I could fit more scary games into my schedule, and also I took I also would have just missed various days just at random. But even if I missed 60 days, that's 300 Let's Tries in a year. That's a lot of individual games getting a preview. And that really shows why I have the Let's Try slot in the first place, is because it gives me the ability to cover so many games overall that I otherwise might not get the chance to cover. And I like, you can only do full playthroughs of so many games, especially when you insist on always doing the full playthrough and everything, whereas there's just so many games out there. And a lot of them deserve to be covered. Some of them are garbage. I've done Let's Try some really not great games that I would not recommend to anyone, and I'm definitely just kind of being quietly bemused by how dumb and bad the game is. But there's plenty of ones where like, oh, look at these cool gems. I'm glad I got a chance to showcase this in some capacity, because I'll never get to all of them. And that's the issue. But anyway, this is a massive bit of off-topicness before I even get to the first question. Some of these will probably be pretty quick, but I'm just going to call all these people anonymous. Some of these people might be in my current Patreon, and they might have even been around for years and asked this exact question, but I'm not going to check. I'm just going to call everyone that's from the old archives anonymous. These are leftover questions from the Minecraft Q&A and then the other Q&A that I just never got to back then because those series ended before the questions petered out. You can actually tell it's like a time. Yeah, these are gonna be. I'm gonna have some really quick minor answers to some of these. You can tell they're in a time capsule though. Like, what didn't you like about The Witness? How could have it been better? During the Talos Principle, you voiced your opinion of why you didn't like those, but for The Witness, you barely had any criticism. The issue here, of course, is well, I can't answer it too much. Is that the my memories of either game are somewhat faded, but almost certainly I probably thought that The Witness was more flawless than the Talos Principle in many ways, like in a more kind of a Portal sense. But at the same time, like, oftentimes it's hard to criticize a game when it doesn't have much of like a concrete story, for example. If you want to talk about like plot holes or just things that you're uncertain about the narrative, it's a lot harder to do that if the game has virtually no narrative, for example. Which a Witness kind of eventually has some form of narrative, but for the most part it's just a vague concept game. I do think I did a Q&A at one point where I discussed that I probably thought the desert area was somewhat strangely introduced and is really opaque for how early you find it in the game, and that finding more straightforward zones sooner and then getting to the desert area later might be more ideal. Yes, the game's non-linear, but the desert area is especially opaque and also especially easy to get to. I think most people will start the game, do the intro area, do the glass blowing ceramics area, then go straight to the desert, just because that's the shape, that's the way, that's kind of the way the level is shaped. Sometime like in the middle you might go to that tree area, and you can wander around, and admittedly the game the game does admittedly throw really opaque things at you pretty early on regardless. Like the central town, the premise of the central town is that you're not supposed to do it until you've beaten the entire game, mostly. Like all the zones, I mean. And you won't know that necessarily, but when you go in, it just every single room has a completely different puzzle there. So like every single area has a completely different puzzle, and they're all in a weird sequence, and it's all completely opaque. But I think that when you see a panel that clearly is covered in symbols you don't understand, you might think, oh, I can learn how to do this somewhere else. Whereas the desert panels, the confusing thing about them is their lack of any apparent thing. You look at them and they seem barren, and you're like, what am I supposed to do here? So like, unlike most of the game where you see a symbol of some sort that you can't understand, and you're like, okay, there must be a way to find out what that symbol means in a simpler context. Instead, you just have weird panels that seem to have nothing on them, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And you can just kind of bash your head against it. And I say that about the symbols, about being introduced to symbols that don't make sense, because that's like the first thing the game does. You beat the intro area, then you find a weird vault that has one symbol you're familiar with and one symbol that you don't understand at all, and you're like, hang on, what's going on here? Why is this other symbol here now? I don't understand. And then you move on. And then literally the next thing around the corner is the little simplified tutorialization of the symbol that you had not seen before. So they set up the idea of like leaving something when you don't understand it, looking elsewhere for an introduction to that thing, and then coming back, because the first area immediately does that to you, and you need to proceed in that way in order to really recognize what's happening. And I think basically everyone I've ever seen play the game does that. They encounter the vault and are like, what's up with this? And then they move on to the next thing and they're like, oh, that's what's up with this. Then they go back to the vault and they do the vault. Overall, The Witness is a fantastically designed game, and so really the reason why I don't have a lot to complain about is the fact that it's like my favorite game that came out that year. Although I usually have more to say negative about games that are even my favorites. I was trying to voice something about Breath of the Wild, and then I was stuck trying to remember what it was. I think Breath of the Wild, if I remember correctly, for example, has like a difficulty curve problem where the game is too easy, by and large. It's shockingly difficult when you first open it, mainly because you encounter like the blue guy that can one-shot you and stuff like that, and that's just like weird. But over time, the game has issues with enemies not being dangerous enough, while also having this whole system where you can just infinitely consume items from your inventory, and that doesn't really help with the difficulty challenge. Like, the idea that your weapons are breaking down over time is interesting, but your inventory of normal items is not nearly as constrained as your inventory for weapons. So while you might be somewhat constrained in your ability to change out weapons and be like, oh no, that one broke now, and oh, that one broke now, what am I gonna do? Let's improvise, let's react. You can pause the game at any time and completely pause it, so you don't have to be panicking or anything, and you can just carry infinite items. So while the weapons breaking is an interesting system, like durability and limited ammo in a Resident Evil game, the game does not go through... Oh god, that thing's creepy. The game does not go through with having limited items the way a Resident Evil game does. So like, while a Resident Evil game will have limited ammunition and uses of knives and stuff like that, they'll also limit how many green herbs you can carry, and even make you share your green herbs and your ammunition and all that all in one inventory. So it's like a risk-reward thing where you're balancing resources and trying to plan ahead. I think Breath of the Wild would be better if it was like that. I think that I think the idea of upping survival elements would actually make the game stronger overall, and kind of wish it had done that. And in particular, a lot of people will say that the highlight of the game is some of those moments where they take your entire inventory away and make you improvise from scratch. And that's not quite the same thing as Resident Evil, in that you don't have a limited inventory space that you're trying to figure out how best to manage. But in those areas, you're stripped of all items and have to go and build up an inventory of items from scratch, and then carefully use the ones you have, because you don't know which ones you'll get in the future. it's basically that one island and the DLC are like the two times where that interesting system pops in, and then you really start to see how strong of a system Breath of the Wild had because of the fact that it has this really advanced system, a series of systems interacting with each other to make up its game world, almost like an 0451 game, like a Deus Ex or something, like all these cool systems working together, like in Prey, where you can try to use them to your advantage and improvise in a way that games often don't necessarily let you do. But letting the game be too easy by just flooding you with resources that you can use infinitely from an inventory that you can pause for at any time kind of undoes that a little bit. And so on. Anonymous asks, what are your thoughts on virtual reality and the way it is headed? Also, are you ever going to order and play / record the HTC Vive? It's expensive, I know, but maybe you could set something up on your Patreon. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but I would donate for you to get the Vive, ? Phrasing is sentence happen weird. I kind of point back to this comment in part. One, it's a funny time capsule just because it predates all this talk about me getting VR potentially. But it actually, this individual comment might have been where I got the idea years later, because I read these comments as they originally happened. This comment might have been one of the influencers. It might have also come up in other contexts. It's hard to remember, of the idea of me putting that up as a Patreon goal. As far as VR in general goes, I think that it's one thing is I still haven't used VR myself in any way, so I still can't talk to how much I think the experience is like a vital experience that everyone should get to have and so on. But the major limitations VR generally faces is that it is like a 1% kind of element of gaming. It's so premium, and generally speaking, premium experiences are not the big money makers usually for the video game industry. There's a reason why consoles are so popular. Having a low price that's standardized and simple and that everyone can agree on and share as this experience, like everybody get a Switch and stuff like that, is a lot easier than trying to fight your way through the VR marketplace and figuring out if it can match up with your graphics card, and also having to buy, not only get the expensive VR equipment, but also already have an expensive computer to go with the VR equipment and so on. It's very few people are going to be able to actually reasonably engage with this material. But then even if you have the money, you have to figure out, like, do I have the space for this, which is difficult. And then also, can I keep the device safe? Am I worried about it being stolen or damaged by other people in the house, or pets, or children, and so on, even after getting it? But then even after you go through all the effort of getting it and like accommodating it, like it's not just a product you have to buy, it's a product you have to accommodate and make space for in your life. It's also a thing where the support is questionable. There definitely are a bunch of VR games coming out, but it's hard not to look at a bunch of them as this is just a floating bird. It's hard not to look at a lot of the VR stuff and realize like that it seems like a lot of the experiences aren't full. Like they feel like E3 demos in some cases, and that can be very disappointing. Because you want to have the cool experience, and you want to have all these cool games, and you want to hop on and buy this expensive thing and be like, cool, now I got the expensive thing. Now it's time. I have to figure out how to control this thing, and it's a little scary because I'm not ready for it. Now I got this expensive thing, I'm good, right? It's like getting a PS4. It just has stuff for me to do on it, right? And maybe when you get PS4 at launch, you might have to wait for a bit for the proper experience and content to come out, but usually there's plenty to play. Like even at, I mean, you know, I don't have to explain the concept of a console launch to you. Sorry, I was getting confused by the way this quest wasn't letting me interact at first, and I was worried. But I guess I just had to wait for the proper real start for it because the stuff was disabled. I don't know. Just throws a tiny little bomb. There it goes. But as of right now, I'm not entirely convinced that life rockets delivered. I'm not. Is this spreading democracy? Oh no! I'm not entirely convinced that there is a proper player base of games to have. And what's a little concerning too is that the games are really marketed towards the idea that they know they're for premium users. Because I've seen that a lot of VR games, the entire experience is often an hour long or less, and they'll charge like $40 for it, which is kind of brutal. And yeah, I'll be the first to be a proponent of like, people shouldn't only just care about the durations of games, because Portal is one of the best games ever and it's only an hour and a half long and stuff like that. But there's a certain extent where it can get pretty brutal if you're charging like anywhere in the ballpark of $60, for example, for like what feels like a half an hour theme park ride experience. Because cashing in entirely on the spectacle of VR to sell to justify your price, as opposed to actually providing content, is kind of brutal. And it's not just about duration, but also the fact that like if a game's sufficiently short, it doesn't tend to have much in the way of mechanical density or interesting gameplay, and isn't that much of a game and is more of a theme park ride. And until you actually get a VR headset, you actually can't really shop around and even fully understand the storefront and like the list of available products for the VR headset until you've already like engaged and found out the hard way, basically. So it's really hard for anyone to have confidence in the platform, and looking at it from the outside, it's hard not to see everything as being shittier. Like, what was it? Not Ubisoft, WB? WB has all of those Batman games, and they keep making more open world, full-scale Batman Arkham games. Look at the Arkham series. And then I think WB was the one that also made a VR Batman game, and it was like 20 minutes long. And it was like almost a sham. It was like you were let into it was like you were let onto a ride at Disney World real quick, and that's it. And it's like, it's not just that I'm not sure people actually want to pay that kind of money for those kinds of experiences when they feel like demos, but also I feel like releasing such things and making them be so public, and then paying Rooster Teeth to do like getting Achievement Hunter to do like a demo of your game and look at it again, to get everyone to look at it and stuff like that, and like putting those things up front and putting them on the front page of the stores and publicizing them heavily, only for them to be what seems like a really questionable, maybe shallow experience. Not only do I think that makes people not necessarily want that game in particular, but I feel like the visibility of those kinds of things might make people less confident in the overall idea of VR. Like, I feel like that kind of stuff does what people call like cheapening the brand, essentially, when you have examples of just the most obvious games on a platform be the ones that don't feel like they're what somebody would call real games, which sounds like gatekeeping, but that's not really what my point is. Like, not to delegitimize what people might be into, but just more the idea that like the game doesn't seem to serve the purpose of being an audience, being a piece of audience content for them to consume. And that's the thing that comes up time to time with YouTube in particular, is the idea that like some pieces of content feel like they just exist so that a YouTuber could play said content and be like, check out my content, and then you like some games seem like they're designed to make a funny video out of said thing, as opposed to for the audience members themselves to play it themselves and then enjoy. I couldn't help but get that feeling a little bit when I played Hello Neighbor, and when I was playing Hello Neighbor, I just had this vague sense of like, what is this? Like, Hello Neighbor was a game that I could not stop hearing about on YouTube. Everyone was playing it all the time, and it was like almost inescapable, it seemed. And I only finally covered it like a year or two later, at long last. And when I finally covered Hello Neighbor, I was just kind of taken aback by the fact that like, it had so little to it, and didn't feel like a game. Not only did it not feel like it was out of early access, it just didn't feel like it was fully featured or like a thought out mechanic system or a particularly engaging game to justify the amount of attention that it got. And it's like that's kind of a whiplash you get sometimes when you watch YouTubers play a game in their edited highlight reel format, and then you get the real game itself and you're like, it's almost like it almost feels like a disingenuous experience by comparison. I kind of think about, like, on some level too, like the idea of like there's people who, this is not a criticism of Subnautica, but there's a lot of like highlight-ish format channels that will cover a game like Subnautica, and like they'll cut out all the quote-unquote boring bits of the game and fundamentally present a different game as a result, because all of the quiet time and prep and farming and so on in Subnautica is such a chunk of the overall body of the experience. And if you remove that, you're like kind of presenting a different experience entirely.
It's too far away.
And one thing I can't help but worry about is that some of this a lot of the content on VR might be better suited for being like small, easily consumable chunks of content that you make a 30-minute video out of, and it serves my purposes in that way, but isn't great for, you know, somebody who shells out $1,000 to upgrade their computer and get this good headset so that they can play what are supposed to be these cool experiences that justify the price afterwards. And so that's my concern, is that like I can reasonably, like I've warmed up to the idea over the years of getting a VR headset, because it seems like something I could reasonably make content out of on my channel. And in particular, part of me thinks that like people on my audience might even be more, I might get more viewership for said videos specifically because so many people don't have a VR headset. So it's like weird exclusive content that it's not even stuff that people are necessarily afraid of spoiling, so they'll just watch the videos because they might think they'll never ever get the VR headset. So like this is their one chance to even know about this weird video game, like it's a museum. But like, so I've warmed up to it for that purpose of like I can use it for my job, but I still don't think I would be getting a VR headset if I didn't have a YouTube channel. Like even after what I've seen, I don't think that I would be confident enough that it would be a consumer product that I would actually get my money's worth out of enjoyment-wise. Like, I think it absolutely is an item that threatens to collect dust when it's not being actively used that day to make a 30-minute video and then move on. But we'll see. I would love to be surprised. I mean, I don't buy products and then hope I don't like them. So, we'll see. Did I forget to farm the other one? Sorry if you hear any weird noises. There's a dog came in the room before I closed the door, and I didn't want to kick her out because she looked sad. But they're just, now she's just like rolling around and panting and making weird noises. And so it's exactly the kind of thing you aren't supposed to let in the room during a recording session. But it's for the Patreon people. They don't need quality. No, I have no idea if it's picking up. She was being good until I turned my attention to the recording. She was just laying there, but that's probably because she thought I was going to throw her out if she did anything. And so she's like doing that thing dogs do, where they shrink in order to avoid gathering attention. They know what they're doing. They always know what they're doing. This one's less of a question, more of kind of a comment. But it's something I apparently felt the need to include it in my notes, like I was going to respond to it in a future video or something. Anonymous says, I've always thought Let's Players talk to foster a connection with the viewer, although it's really a one-way thing. It's not like you can hear us talk daily, except through the comments. As I watch more of your videos, the more of a bud you seem to me. Just through listening to your thoughts and random bullshit while gaming. Of course, it's mostly an illusory bond, but nevertheless it still makes watching your vids more enjoyable and adds a personal touch. I was trying to pilot through this area while also reading that. There was like some slight grammar throw-offs there where the sentence seemed, it was like twisting my brain. I recognize this person because they've been around for years, and they at least were on Patreon. I don't know if they are right now. But it speaks to this one was somewhat worth commenting on because it kind of highlights the parasocial relationship element of everything. In particular, it was interesting because this comment, when I singled it out and everything and would have responded to it, but if I ever made another video in that particular series, this comment probably would have gotten a different response of some form back then, and now would get a new one because the context is somewhat changed. Because back then, I was definitely aware of the idea that like Let's Players are doing commentary and so on in order to try to like make themselves stand out from the crowd and showcase individual personalities, because that's one of the main selling points you can have when you're all playing the same games and stuff like that, or so many other elements. And also just having people feel in some way connected to you is one way to get them to keep watching and stuff like that. But at the same time, I've become increasingly aware of like the perils these days of parasocial relationships and so on, and the weird manifestations that can ultimately have. And I fall victim to it myself too, where I will watch somebody too much and then like behave potentially inappropriately or confusingly and so on. Yeah. I recently had an experience where this happens every single time basically, where I try to reach out to another YouTuber and it doesn't go quite as planned, and I kind of panic and lose it a little bit. Lose it is a strong way of framing it. That makes it sound way weirder. Like, I think I've given the example before of, like, people going to conventions. I always find it cruel and unempathetic and unintentionally revealing of the person making the video and how much they kind of suck as opposed to the contents of the video. Whenever people make a cringe compilation of, like, people at conventions trying to ask questions to, like, their favorite YouTubers or whatever, and they get all nervous and scared and oh no, and like they're like they ask a really awkward question, or maybe they're a little inappropriate, or maybe they're a little too afraid to say anything once they actually get there and so on. Like, there's so many different reactions people give when they talk to people that they know about from online and think they know, but they just know about them from the internet, and how that can lead to incredibly awkward situations that go into cringe compilations on the YouTube, which among other things is kind of cruel because you're featuring somebody who doesn't give you their permission in the first place to feature them. So you're kind of like, it is kind of like a weird, like, doxing, like, fucked up thing to do to kids, to show them publicly and mock them when they didn't even opt into being in a video in the first place. But that's a whole other side thing that bothers me. But I always got a perspective from that kind of thing because of this is a whole parasocial thing where, like, you totally can listen to somebody on the modern internet. You can listen to somebody talk for dozens, hundreds, thousands of hours. Like, I have been listening to the Rooster Teeth podcast from episode 1, and I want to say that they're over 500 episodes deep. Yeah, they are. They're definitely more than 500 episodes deep, and like that's like 10 years of podcasts, isn't it? Like, if you do a weekly podcast every week, that's 52 podcasts a year. That would make 500 podcasts about 10 years, which is a terrifying concept to even think about. But then I think about, like, oh yeah, because I was listening to them before I went to school, or before I went to college, and college was like 5.5 years, and I've been out of college for a few years, and also doing this full time for a few years. That's what a decade means, ultimately. And so, like, you can get really familiar with a bunch of people that literally don't know that you exist. And almost all of us do it in some way. People watch reality shows, they watch YouTube, they listen to podcasts, they do some other thing in some way. And so I get people that approach me in various ways and just act incredibly inappropriately in some cases, or strangely, and I kind of get it on some level because our brains are not designed to process these kinds of interactions. And and despite all the awareness that I have and how much I think about these things, I still kind of stumble into these things where I get super nervous trying to like collaborate with people. Like one of the reasons you see, like I've been with Bird and making videos with Bird and Andrew for so many years, and it's easy just to stick with the same people because you've already gotten past that point. And a large number of the people that I collaborate with that aren't those two people are people that I was introduced to via those two people, or introduced to people in other ways, or people that I just am personal friends with in normal life that I then trick into being in videos. And so like that's where like Hephaestus, Purple Phantom, Bad Stainless, other people in the group are like, a lot of these are people that just kind of fell in my lap via other people, so I didn't have to deal with the introduction. Whereas like Kernel RPG is actually one of the few people that I reached out to individually. Specifically, more specifically, I reached out to Bumpy McSquigums, which is still a hard name to get used to, and found out in the process of doing so that he already collaborated with Kernel RPG on a regular basis, and I'm like, oh, I know that channel too. And so we kind of figured that out, and we did that. We played the game Viking Squad together, and that was the one series we all did together. I just figured I'd give it a go, because whenever I was looking up videos of games I was playing that were like niche RPGs and stuff like that, one of the channels that always came up was Bumpy McSquigums, and funnily enough, yeah, the other channel that would come up constantly was Kernel RPG. So finding out they already knew each other was actually really convenient. But in this case, I think it was one of the few times where it was really easy to just talk to them about the idea of making a video sometime, because I didn't know who they were. It was just like, there's just some random dudes that hadn't been doing YouTube long enough that I was like, okay, they're not going to be crazy probably. Let's try this out. And so that it's kind of funny that that one's the one that worked out, because it might be indicative of the idea that like they're not built up in my head, so I can just talk to them like there's some random person, because they were. Whereas there's actually been multiple times where I've tried to approach channels that are people that I've actually cared about on some level for years, and it's so much harder. It is so much harder to figure out even how to talk to them, and so much more crushing when they don't respond, or some kind of interaction happens where you can't process what to do or what to think about what's going on, or really just anything beyond a perfect outcome can be a really confusing headspace to navigate. I've had all over the place. I've had ones where they don't respond at all. I've had ones where they kind of respond in a way that blows me off, like they almost like hand me off to some other thing and then they never get back to me. I've had channels where, and then I did have one channel that it's almost like they called my bluff. That's not what their intention was, but it's like I talked about collaborating with somebody once when this was a while ago too, years ago. And then they just were like, yeah, sure. And I was like, and I didn't know how to, I actually hadn't thought past the idea of them actually saying yes, and hadn't come up with anything to do. And it didn't end up materializing because I was a coward in part. Although that was a little more high pressure. Because when I reached out to that person, in part it was a thing that was easier when it was a fantasy in my head as opposed to the idea of executing on it. But it was a YouTuber that I knew was relatively local and does like live action stuff, and I didn't really fully expect an answer, or didn't fully believe in it. Even if I thought something might happen, I didn't fully believe it. It's hard to put it a little bit, hard to explain. But when they were like open to the idea, I was so caught off guard and so intimidated by the actual prospects of doing it, like driving to their area and like meeting them and turning parasocial into social, basically. It's hard for everyone. We're all people. Yay. I had an amazingly awkward interaction recently where somebody was streaming, and I realized, oh, they're doing Apex and they don't even have a full group or anything. and we're like comparable size YouTube channels, and I've been a fan of their content for years. So I was thinking like, hey, I could totally make this like a thing. Like I could probably contact them and we could do Apex together or something. And find out that I drafted a thing to send to them on Discord, and then I sent it to them, and the Discord message just turned red, which meant that it didn't send, which was indicative of like, oh, they don't accept messages unless you're like a friend, basically. Shit. Okay. So I tried checking his Twitter. His Twitter doesn't have direct messages enabled. Alright, let's check YouTube's messaging. Oh, YouTube removed the message system. You can't just message somebody else's channel directly. You can't send people direct messages anymore on YouTube. Okay, that's cool. It's fine. I'll just contact him via his email. Oh. He doesn't have a public email listed anywhere on his profile. That's cool. That's cool. And so like in my head I'm like, this is going to be an easy thing. I'll reach out to him and he'll say yes or no or whatever, and it's just no big deal. And the channel is of comparable size in like subscriber and viewership rating, so I was like, see, like it's like, you see, I'm not some crazy rando. I'm a member of the same video production community that you take part in, and I would like to collaborate and so on. It seemed reasonable. So I took to basically trying to get his attention during his stream among all of the stream people, which is basically like, that's where we really crossed the line to where I just regret the entire day at this point. Was the point where I was trying to contact them directly via their stream comments on their stream, because they don't have any public facing way to contact them. I just felt like the weirdest person, because now it's a thing that everyone can see. Didn't really pan out anyway. He kind of responded and kind of gave me a blow off thing where he was like, yeah, you could do this to get to me, and it's like, it was almost certainly a way to just get me to just get the messages to not go anywhere, like something he didn't plan on following up on, probably because I have not heard back in the ensuing days since that. And so even I can have embarrassing interactions with YouTube people that I enjoy when I take things too far or approach things the wrong way. Admittedly, in part, they are a little, almost weirdly insular, apparently, in a way that I didn't anticipate until I went through with trying to actually contact them. But at the same time, like, I can absolutely make the mistake of thinking I can just go in and, like, almost like I definitely think on some level that me doing this was on some level facilitated by the fact that the idea of contacting this person probably felt more natural than it would have otherwise, in part because of the fact that I was familiar with them and sort of exposed to them via their content. And so, like, even if I think I can be self-aware of this stuff, I probably was being influenced by this idea that, like, you become familiar or almost even friends with this person that doesn't know you exist by consuming their content. Like, I think to some extent that kind of manifests even if you're fully aware of the idea of it, because it's just, our brains are stupid and just do things at us, and we can't, it's like, sometimes it's like breathing, where it's just like we can't control whether or not these things will work the way we want them to or not. And so I think that on some level that's kind of what happens, is like certain barriers, it felt like they might have been already broken down in the background, so it was easier for me to make a fool of myself, basically. And so we all do it. It's best just to try to be aware of it before you make any weird, unhealthy mistakes, as opposed to just awkwardly shouting at somebody in a stream chat and all that. But yeah, fun. Anonymous asks, how come you've stopped at Bachelor of Science level of education when you clearly have a brain capacity for much more, especially in engineering domain that I know very well? Your deductive thinking is way above average, and your persistence in solving the problems is on PhD level. I know that the U.S. education system is brutal with the amount of money you have to invest, but but is it that or your personal choice being boring, repetitive, uninspiring, etc.? I think the two biggest influences on me not going through with further education beyond getting a Bachelor of Science degree in geology was, one, money, and two, yeah, uninspired to some degree. Oh, there's some bad guys going in to get the monster. I'll probably have to wait for them to come and go before I even think about getting this done. I think it's some water. I feel froggy. The one is, yes, money. I was pretty lucky in a lot of ways when it came to my educational costs. They're having a little fight down there. I can hear it. One, my parents got divorced right before I was graduating high school, which dropped the income level of my household by a fair margin, because they were both employed. Which meant that I qualified for better scholarships. This was despite also having some savings. So like my parents had saved some money for college. It didn't last the longest, but they had saved somewhat. And then also they got divorced right before I went to college, which meant that when I was applying for scholarships or grants or whatnot, I was able to afford more. Because I mean, we were able to qualify for more because my household income had dropped. Like that was the first surprise thing. Then the good news was I got a decent number of scholarships and grants. I tested very well. I got 2,000 on the SAT, which isn't always the best useful number to compare, because I guess there's whenever people cross-compare numbers, it's like they had a different scoring system entirely than the one I even had to go off of, so it's not always a good one-to-one thing. But my main point of reference was that I had a friend that was going to, was it UC Santa Barbara? Yeah. And it's like they were there, in my perspective, they were on the next level, because they were going to the scary, expensive colleges. Because I was planning on going to a state college, because like it's like you go to community colleges, state colleges, or you go to like the UCs, or you go to some scary, private, expensive, exclusive nightmare thing. In my brain, the next thing's basically Harvard or something. And so I didn't want to go to a community college because, one, you don't even really get a bachelor's degree there, if I remember correctly, or at least it's a hell of a thing to work with. But going to a UC, like that's the difference between spending thousands of dollars per semester or tens of thousands of dollars per semester. Like I knew I did not have that kind of money saved, and that my grants and scholarships weren't on that scale, and I didn't expect to make that kind of money in any particular amount of time, because, you know, I don't know, you're a kid trying to figure out what the hell your life's going to be and how the hell you're going to survive. So it's really hard in general to come up with what to do. But all I knew is that that was like numbers of money that I had never comprehended in my life. So I tried to avoid those kinds of scary ideas, generally speaking. Oh, I don't have trinkets yet. Shit. How do I not have a trinket yet? I'm level 45. I don't remember. I don't know if I've been throwing them away or if I've just been forgetting to, or this is when you qualify for them. Like, I viewed community college as beneath me, but I viewed UCs as unobtainable, and Harvard and Stanford type shit as being an alien world. So I was pretty sure I was going to a state college, and the person, particularly, I took the SAT twice, and my friend that was going to UC Santa Barbara took the Jesus Christ. This is why you're not allowed in here. That scared the shit out of me. It's the one yappy dog. That's fine. You're getting thrown out in the future. That's it. There goes the goodwill. You're not good enough to be quiet and hang out. You act like I'll be good. I'll lay down and be quiet. But then they let you sit here unattended for a bit and you start making the lap. That scared the shit out of me. But I took the SAT twice, and my friend that was going to a much more expensive college took the SAT twice. And specifically, the point of reference I remember being was that I scored higher on my first attempt than he scored on his second attempt. Like, he had to go back and try again and still did worse than I did the first time. And I was like, oh shit. I must have done well. And I remember the percentile being rather favorable when I looked at how I ranked throughout the state for that particular test and stuff like that, I guess. So that was encouraging. Fun story, by the way. Both times I took the SAT, my brain was melted, basically. In particular, what happened when I took the SATs is that, oh god, what's happening right now? What is this quest? Both times I took the SATs, I had a graphing calculator, which was required to take the test. You take it with you. You put it on the little rail basket under your seat for the majority of the test, and then you only bring it out for the part of the test that you're allowed to bring it out for. And the first time I took the SAT, I was so nervous and a wreck and so on. And the first thing that stood out to me was the fact that the SAT is long. It's not about how hard the questions are, it's that it's an endurance test. Each chunk of the test is like an hour long, if I remember correctly, and has a lot of questions. So it's not just like normally when you take a test in high school or whatever, it's more about like, can I be right is the primary determining factor. And then you usually have time, generally speaking, to take the test in high school. And you take the test and then you finish it, and you probably sit there politely waiting for the period to end while other people are still doing the test or whatever. The SAT, though, is so long, and it's not necessarily hard, but the questions do stumble you. And the biggest thing that I realized after taking the first time was that you have to, make yourself keep answering questions. You have to keep lighting a fire under your own ass to keep going, because fatigue sets in, because it's so many questions for so long, and then you take a short 15-minute break or something, and you try to suck sustenance out of a snack while getting some sunlight, and then go right back in and do it again. And you have to answer so many questions so quickly that you have to be you kind of have to force yourself to keep looking at the clock and keep being kind of stressed just to keep yourself going. Because I found that the first time I took the test, entire chunks of the test were actually left not filled in because I didn't finish in time for some of the sections, because I just was kind of just treating it like any other test where you just kind of, you just take the time to read the question, think about it, answer it, and then the next one, and solve it and whatever, and give it its due time, because you want to be right. So you want to double and triple check the answer, and you want to really think about it and make sure you're right. But you don't have time for that in the SAT. It's an endurance run. It's a marathon. You have to keep moving, which was a big lesson that helped the second time. But I was so zonked out by the time I took it the first time that I left the graphing calculator under my seat, and I left it there and left, which was not good, because graphing calculators are not cheap, or at least they weren't. I have no idea how much they cost nowadays, but back then it was in the ballpark of $100 or something, which isn't cheap in general, but was especially not cheap when you're unemployed because you're a high school student like that. So I didn't really have the money to replace it. So I had to go all the way back. And the issue here is that I lived in small-ish communities. It's not rural or anything, but it's not the city. So there wasn't a testing center in my town. I had to drive to a different town an hour away to take the SAT. So that means after driving an hour to get there in the morning, and then taking all the tests, I then drove home, then drove back there to get my calculator that I forgot, which was thankfully still there, in lost and found kind of situation. And then I drove all the way back again. So I spent 4 hours driving that day. It was brutal. But that was this was the less shitty version of me being mentally taxed by taking the SAT. When I took the SAT the second time, I was worse. My score was better, but I performed worse in a few different ways. One, I straight up like, so they kind of randomize the order in which you take the sections of the SAT, and you do them in different chunks for whatever reason or something, and you have to just follow along and carefully pay attention to the instructions you're being given about what to take where, and like which page of the answer booklet to turn to for particular parts and stuff like that. I made a mistake, and I think it's a reasonable mistake because you're so burned out during that experience, but I did not put my answers on the right pages, which would have been devastating for my that would have been devastating for my actual score, because it didn't matter how well I took the test. If they're literally on the wrong pages, then that means that they're going to be graded as being the answers to the wrong questions. So I would have been doomed. Especially, it's all multiple choice bubbles and everything. But thankfully, thank God, I was able to ask them for like after I took the entire test, I was able to explain my situation to the people that were running it, and they actually did give me a new answers booklet so I could copy my answers over onto the correct pages and fix it, which generally speaking, it makes sense they let me do it, because I couldn't really cheat or anything. I was literally just copying bubbles from one page to the other page, so they'd be correct this time. It's not like I could go back and reread the questions, because the testing booklet and the Scantron were two separate pieces of paper, and so they'd already taken the testing booklets back, so it was just the things the answers go into. So I guess it made sense that they let me fix my answers by moving them to the correct pages, because it's not like I could have corrected my answers or realized, oh, that's actually the answer, and changed one of them or anything, because all I had was bubbles. But they could have. I've just been in the school system enough to know that they absolutely could have been dicks about it and not let me do it. So I'm just thankful that they did let me do that, because that was great news. That just would have been awful, especially since like you wait all year for the SAT to happen, and you pay out the ass to take it in the first place, which in itself is kind of fucked up, because that means that the test itself is then something that is like it's almost a little classist to like have an entry fee on the ability to take the SAT at all, when taking the SAT is mandatory in order to figure out whether or not you can like qualify for certain scholarships and things like that. Like if you're somebody that's just in a super low income household, then like you're already having to deal with the fact like school supplies and all these other things are like costs that you have to weigh against the fact that you don't have money in your household. But then you're going to just arbitrarily have this insane price on the SAT test itself. It's a piece of paper you fill out. Like, it's not like the supplies are expensive, and yet it costs like $80 per test. And that's not just for SAT. You don't just pay once to like deal with all SATs. You pay per test. So if you take like 4 different SAT tests, I'm sorry, no, wait, I was thinking of AP tests for a second there. Wait, now I don't remember. Shit. Do you pay for the SAT? I think you do pay for the SAT. I don't think I'm making that up, but when I just thought about taking multiple SAT tests the same year, I realized, oh wait, no, I'm thinking of AP tests, which is something I also took. But that was also kind of brutal. I remember I specifically, even back in high school, I was making money-based decisions on my education, which is kind of a bummer. Because as a strategy, I was taking every single AP test that I could, if I thought I had a chance of succeeding at it, because it meant that was college credit. That meant that you didn't have to take that class in college because you already had the credit for it, which would save you money in college, which is really expensive. So I was taking as many AP tests as I could. In particular, between the entry exam you take for college that places you in English and the AP test that I took related to English before I went to college, I actually ended up not taking a single English class in wow, it's showing. I ended up not taking a single English class in all of college, which is weird to think about, because it was like a staple of high school and everything before that was that you have to take, you know, language. Now, I don't mean foreign language, but just general language, like writing and reading and English, like that. But like, in all of college because I'd tested out of it and also gotten pre-approved credit from like the AP tests. I actually just didn't have to take a single English class in the entirety of my college degree, which was just a weird thing to realize I had accomplished somehow. But in particular, when I took calculus in high school, it went poorly. It was like the first semester was derivatives and the second semester was integrals. And for the entire first semester when we were doing derivatives, I did not understand derivatives. And I just could not, it was not clicking for me for whatever reason. And then by the time we started dealing with integrals, I then actually finally started to figure out derivatives, and then everything kind of fell into place because integrals are just kind of reverse derivatives as far as the methodology goes. So by the end of the year, I kind of did understand everything, but by the time you sign up for AP tests, I was in the middle of thinking I'm completely fucked and am not going to qualify. I will not be able to succeed. Like, I was in a stage where I was in a stage of school of my calculus class where I was really not doing well when it was time to sign up for the AP tests. So I chose not to sign up for them because they cost money. Not just the time investment, like it was something in the ballpark of like $100 just to take the test in the first place. And I'm like, well, what's the point of paying them and going there if I'm just going to fail the test? But actually by the end of the year, I kind of did have the class figured out. So I probably would have passed the test, and then I would have not had to take calculus in college, which would have been nice. But I fucked that up. And so like even at that stage, I was having to make money-based decisions about how my education would work, and that's kind of the bummer about the American system to some extent. Which in its way, actually, the SATs were kind of its own funny... Oh, hello. Joke's on you, man. I found Zangtres long ago. Oh, I can't read that in time. He talks too fast. Now that Zangtres is mine again, this lash should be rejoined. Oh, shit. Is it because something bad gonna... Oh, I'm just gonna fight him. Okay. Let's get him. You cannot handle my might. Now you're stunned. You said that you were a boss, but are you really? Ha 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 ha. No, he doesn't stand a chance. You want to try this again, buddy? No? There it goes. Hey, he didn't die. Alright. Anyway, well, that's over. I got sidetracked. I have a few things I haven't followed up on. Oh yeah, the end course of me taking the SAT the second time was that not only did I did do better on the test, but not only did I, as a result, put the freaking answers on the wrong pages, I also then went home only to realize for the second consecutive year I had left my calculator under my desk and had to drive all the way back to the testing center to get it back again. And once again, thankfully, it was there for me to get it again. But that was a graphing calculator that I had left at a testing center on 2 consecutive years during the SAT and had to come back to get. So not only was I zonked out that so bad that I made more mistakes out around the test than I'd had last year, but I even made the same mistake again as last time. But I did test way better, and I think it had less to do with actual education and aptitude and more to do with the fact that I had the prior experience of taking it last time to realize just how much I had to force myself to keep moving forward.
Time is money, friend.
And some of it is that when you're mentally exhausted, it's just easy to let yourself zone out for any period of time, stare at the ceiling, or just like lose your place for a moment and just try to recover a little bit because you're so fatigued. And that's, I think that normally tests allow you to do that without being destroyed, but the SAT is so fast-paced that if you lose any time that way, you lose the test more or less, and that's the problem. And so I think the primary reason I scored higher, which I scored 300 points higher the second time. I think my scores were 1710 and 2000. I think it was primarily just the experience of understanding what the SAT was like that made the second score so much higher. above all else. But on the topic of calculus, the experience, the fucking wrangle I went through there is like, which kind of undoes the efforts of me getting so much efficiency set up for like me getting to skip English and stuff like that, was that calculus was such a pain in the ass, because I took it in high school, did not get a great grade, but I did understand it by the end. But I thought I wasn't going to understand it, so I didn't take the SAT because it would have been a waste of money. But it turns out it would have not been a waste of money, because by the end of the semester I did understand the class, but also I didn't get a good grade in the class necessarily, because you can't make up for the fact that you did bad on the previous test, even if by the end of the year you understand everything, which is itself is a problem with the education system, that you are permanently hampered by scores you got earlier in the semester that no longer reflect your actual level of knowledge, so you end up with a grade at the end of the semester that's not reflective of how well you understand the subject, which is why it defeats the point of having a grade. Well, yeah, well, you got a 50% on this test that you took 6 months ago, so fuck you. No, if I understand calculus, I should get a passing grade in calculus. It shouldn't be based on whether or not I understood calculus 6 months ago. It should be based on whether or not I understand it at the end. Especially in something like calculus, where it's like, it's not like we didn't go back to those subjects. Like in a history class, you kind of cover one subject at a time for chunks of time, and then move on from them and never go back to them for the rest of that class. But in like a math class, you're often building in a kind of linear progression over the course of the year, so you kind of have to figure out the previous stuff in order to do well on the later stuff. So having the grade you got on the previous stuff continue to hamper you, even though you understand it now, is a real bummer, because it's like, it punishes you if you're somebody who understood the class at the end, and ultimately the class was successful in teaching you the subject, but you were lagging behind. Like, just like a week or so. Like, your level of understanding was just like a week behind the course material throughout the semester. Like, that would, if you look at it in that way, you're like, oh, that's somebody who is pretty, like, almost on the ball. This is going all right. But the way that testing works means that that person is failing constantly and is a failure and doesn't get credit for the class, is the way that that's interpreted. Even though at the end of the year they understand everything, or at least the vast majority of everything. If they're just slightly late on understanding each thing, then that means that they were a bad student, and so on. That's what happens when you try to... It's actually kind of similar to the issue with like video game scores to some degree. It's like trying to come up with a number score ranking for everything in our lives. You have to be really careful about that, because the system by which the number is arrived upon and what the number means and how people interpret the number is more important than... I mean, that's everything. That's everything. What people think the number means is what matters, and so you have to try to make sure that what the number is reflecting and what people think the number means are the same thing, and that's the struggle. It's like if you give somebody a certain score and that labels them as a failure, then they better be a failure, for example. I'm saying all this even though I got like a C+. Or like, was it a C-? It's been, I don't know. It's been like 11 years since I graduated high school, so I don't remember what grade I got anymore. But I didn't get an F. I've never had an F in high school or before. I don't remember if I ever got one. But it was not an F though. But it was frustrating. But what happened with calculus is that I then went on to try to take calculus in college, but I wanted to focus on it and get it done on its own thing. So what I did is I went to a community college during my summer. So I was on summer break between semesters at my main college, and I went to a community college to just take calculus. And I'm like, it's calculus. Obviously, this is the same class, right? I took it, I passed it, I did a great job, it was fine. In fact, it felt really pointless because it turns out that I really did, like, understand calculus by the end of high school, which meant that it was really redundant to take it again in college, but I needed the credit in order to get my degree. Because at the time I was a computer science major, and you needed calculus to get a degree in computer science. You needed other maths after that too. Then I went to geology later, which I think calculus was the end point for what degree you needed at that point. You just needed calculus and that was it. So I was taking it at this community college, and I took it, I blazed through it, it was no big deal. And then I put in the forms to transfer the college credit to my other college. And then, you know, went back to my normal college, and you have to wait like weeks or months for this to happen to find out whether it worked and so on. And then I finally get the notification that my credit has transferred. And guess what? When I transferred my college credit for calculus to my college, my actual college, it didn't count as calculus, even though it was calculus. It counted as some sort of intro to maths bullshit. They gave me credit for a completely different math course that I never took instead of calculus, because this entire system is stupid. So that meant that I had to take calculus for a third time, a class I'll remind you I've never failed before. I've passed this class every time I've taken it, yet our schooling system is so silly that I'm taking it for a third time just so on paper someone can acknowledge that I have it. I finally am hunkering down to take it in my actual college during the semester instead of as its own thing that I could focus on. I just figured math is kind of knowledge intensive and also homework intensive, and I just wanted to do it in its own thing and as a vacuum between my real semesters, and that didn't work out. And then, yeah, I got calculus out of the way finally when I took it the third goddamn time. The funny thing is I've taken calculus 3 times now and passed it 3 times, and I probably still have managed to forget what calculus is because it hasn't come up. Not only would it probably not have come up in that much in geology if I was still doing a career in that right now, but it certainly doesn't come up in my current career, like, ever. I understand the premise of a derivative, but yeah, I'm probably never going to use that stuff. That's the whole thing. But because geology is a science and that's a STEM field, it has to you have to at least go to calculus in your maths, and that's the whole thing. That's just how they handle that stuff. But that was a mess. College is stupid. But this is a nested rant. There's so many layers here. We have to go back to the previous layers of the onion, because I'm pretty sure I started this whole thing by saying how lucky I was in college, and I never got back to that because I went on the sidetrack of because I talked about the scholarships I qualified for, which led to talking about the SAT experience, but then talking about that reminded me of the calculus experience and so on. But going back to the original layer of the onion, we were going back to how lucky I was, which was that first my parents got divorced, so it lowered our income and made me qualify for a lot more than I would have a year ago, scholarship-wise. Then I got a good score on the SAT, which led to me getting even better scores. Like between my SAT score and my parents' divorce, and the income level dropping, like I just qualified for all sorts of things as far as grants and scholarships went. And so that got me going for a while, but I also ended up being in college longer than expected, in part because of the fact that I went and took the computer science degree and then decided I didn't want to keep going with that, so I went and switched to geology. And so changing majors, it wasn't a massive problem. I had not wasted a lot of time. I'd only spent like 3 semesters on computer science, and because I was switching from a STEM field to another STEM field, the general education required for the degree was a lot of the same classes, so most of the time was not lost. But I did have an aimless semester where I did not know what to do with myself. So I took 3 semesters of computer science, and then I quit computer science. And when I quit computer science, I spent a whole semester just taking general education. I just looked in the pamphlet of like, what are the classes that I have to take in order to graduate from basically any degree ever, at least in the STEM fields. And I just took classes from that list, just so I would not be wasting a semester, because I could not come up with what I wanted to do with my life. But the next semester was going to happen one way or another, and I wasn't going to take a semester off, so I took a semester off, air quotes, and that I wasn't making progress on any kind of major but I was instead just doing classes I would eventually need to graduate no matter what. And so it was just a weird low pressure semester. It was interesting. It felt like high school, because in college you have like your main classes and your general education, and that you have like your major that is like your main purpose for being there, and then you have your general education where you go off and just kind of tick some boxes, which is what high school and all other public school before college feels like. Is just a bunch of things that the people tell you you're supposed to take, and that's it. And you're just kind of floating from like home ec to wood shop to PE to physics, because that's just what's on your schedule. That's what that semester felt like, and it was kind of interesting to go back to that first semester. But that semester ended, and I still didn't know what the fuck I wanted to do. So, no joke, I picked geology because the closest thing I could come up with is that I wanted to go into science, because that was like something I remembered enjoying, and that's the best I could go on. Because that was the weird thing about my upbringing in general, is that I was just raised to go to college, is what it felt like. Like I grew up, and the parents are just like, you're going to get good grades in school. So I got good grades in school. And then it's like, you're going to go to college. So I would just always plan on going to college. But like, none of the vocations they would bring up ever literally rung true. Like the idea of like, you should be a lawyer, ha ha ha, as being like the joke, because I would like argue a lot and crap like that. Like, oh, I never had much of like a dream job, generally speaking. It's just more that like I grow up living in a capitalist society, so I must get job in order to continue surviving in a context that I would find reasonable. So I must get college degree because that's how you do that, which turned out to be kind of a farce, didn't it? Haha, joke's on. Yeah. My generation was the generation that was raised by people who largely did not go to college and saw college as the magical fix for having a good life. So they sent us to college, and then we found out that was bullshit, because a whole lot of us, I have so many friends with college degrees that can't find jobs anywhere related to that field, or even in general that require that reflect the fact they went to college. So it's like, I know so many people that got a college degree just to go work at Starbucks or a theater, until some kind of thing happens years later, maybe, and then it probably has nothing to do with going their college degree anyway. That's been such a universal experience. Like a good example was actually that like Joe, one of it's like me, Andrew, and Joe would make videos together. Joe had like a sound engineering degree or something like that, and he actually did work at a Cold Stone and then a Starbucks while we were making those videos. And now he's off in Japan teaching English to Japanese children with his sound engineer degree, or whatever it's called. We have weird lives. So I was just doing college because I was supposed to, more or less. As weird as that might sound, it's just the reality of it. And so when I was wrapping up my semester of not having a major, I'm like, well, I gotta have a major. So I kind of just leaned towards sciences, hoping I would find a calling, basically. Because I remembered, oh, I liked all my science classes in school. Science is neat. I'd support science. It's cool. So I figured if I just picked a science class, I'd kind of fall into that. And geology was actually the one. Like, we kind of got down to a list of ones that I was kind of leaning towards, and then geology among that list was one that had the most overlapping GE, general education courses, with the ones that I'd already taken. So basically geology was a science class that I was like, maybe that one, that also happened to be the science class that I had already completed the most of accidentally via the classes I had taken over the last 4 semesters. And so that's how dedicated I was to this whole idea. That's how much this was my calling and my vision in life. So no, geology is not my dream. I grew to appreciate a lot of elements of it and enjoy a lot of elements of it, and I like sharing things I learned about it because, you know, I get engaged with the things I learn about in school and so on. Generally speaking, I like school as a concept. Just the learning part of it. It's like a lot of people say, where it's a thing that you appreciate more afterwards than during. because during it's stressful and their whole life's ahead of you and you don't really fully understand what that means and what's gonna happen to you, and everyone's telling you that every single test is gonna affect your future, so you're stressed out all the time. And also you're surrounded by teenagers, which are the worst human beings on the planet because they have zero empathy and are shitty garbage people that will just abuse you every day. So a lot of that stuff sucks. But school's neat. Like when I hear about like people just going to college for fun because they're just apparently just so well-to-do they can just do that kind of thing with their free time, I get it. I get the idea of like sitting in on the lectures of a college course in your free time or something, if it's something you're interested in, because like learning things is interesting. I watch video essays and educational YouTube channels constantly, and that's just a thing I like. So on that level, yeah, it's cool, but not like my way of life or anything. Me taking my geology degree was a means to an end. You know, mustn't disappoint father. You were raised to go to school, so you're gonna go to school and try not to embarrass and enrage your family and so on, and try to live up to some sort of legacy or idea of what your life was supposed to be and so on, while not really understanding what you're doing. Because being in your teenage years and early 20s is so confusing, because you just have a vague idea of what expectations are layered upon you, but no idea on how to execute them. And also, you won't fully understand what almost any of the things you're doing mean until after you've already made all your decisions. And then people just find themselves in that life. And hopefully you didn't make horrible decisions regarding what career you've pursued or what marriage you've fallen into or something, while still trying to figure yourself out, and also what the world is like, because you can't really fully appreciate what normal life is like until you're actually in it, because when you're a kid, you're in such a weird version of life for the longest time. So when I graduated with a bachelor's degree and didn't really see any job prospects materializing, I wasn't really in a hurry to invest more. Oh right, I didn't really finish the subject of how lucky I was, which is that in addition to all the early stuff that happened with luck-wise, right when my money was running out, what happened was that my dad actually married a disabled veteran. And so my new stepmother gave me access to certain like legal things, and that allowed me to actually stop paying tuition. So even despite everything and the testing and everything, I actually was not going to make it through college money-wise. It was just dumb luck, which is that my dad happened to marry somebody who happened to be a disabled veteran, which meant that I don't know if the disabled veteran part's actually important. I think it just might just be the veteran part. I don't remember exactly. But there's a thing where like people, veterans and like the people that count as like the children of veterans and so on, they can basically just go to school in state colleges for free. And so I did. You still had to pay for books and supplies, so I still was paying like out the ass every semester, but I was paying a fraction of what I'd been paying before. Like the actual tuition, the number, like the flat fee that you pay to go to school every semester, it just went away for like the last year and a half or so. I just didn't have that. It was like cheating. Like I'm completely aware of how much this was like, what? Really? But that's what happened. Is this thing a better weapon? That'd be funny. It would be pretty funny if I found a random staff that was a better weapon than my actual weapon. But yeah, despite all the best things, I was actually going to kind of crash and burn. And by crash and burn, I mean have debt. But because that happened, I didn't have to pay tuition for a while and was able to get through the rest of college without having debt. So to this day, I have actually never taken out a loan, period. Which isn't the worst thing ever in some contexts, especially if I like buy a home or something probably. But specifically in college, like so much of the country is just under a mountain of student debt. And I'm lucky enough, due to the serious things I've said before, and some of my own choices and accomplishments, to have gotten through college with a degree intact, Bachelor of Science and everything, and not accrue debt. Like, I don't have student loans to pay off every month. So right now, the costs I have are just normal costs. Rent, food, insurance, and so on. Car, things like that. And that is such a blessing. And it's a good thing, because on some level, like, the jobs are just gone. like I grew up in a recession. All of my teenage and adult years, actually not so much teenage. I grew up in a decent economy because I grew up in the 90s and everything. And then the moment I was of the age to be going to college and then getting a job after college was the moment that the Great Recession happened. And I'm just growing up being told how fucked I am, basically. It's like, welcome to the workforce. Welcome to being of legal adult age. Because I became an adult in 2008, which is the exact year people credit as being the beginning of the Great Recession. Fuck me, right? So the moment I was an adult, the economy was like, no, yeah, you know all those hopes and prospects you thought you had? Nah, brah, they're out. Or, good luck. And largely that's proven to be mostly true. So I didn't have much confidence in my current degree's ability to get me jobs, and I didn't have a lot of reason to necessarily believe that investing a lot more money to get through even harder versions of college would be something that would then translate to me then getting the jobs that weren't materializing so far. And so it's a risk reward thing where, like, I could have put myself in crippling debt because all of my reserves were gone, all of my scholarships and so on, and my savings, like, we were done with those now. And also I was aging out of the I was actually reaching the peak age for the whole not paying scholarship thing, if I remember correctly. It's a little fuzzy now because I'm trying to retell this story so much later. But as far as I'm aware, I think that the not having to pay for college thing was also going to expire based on some kind of duration. Either it might have been an expiration date based on when the person last served in the forces, or it might have been an expiration based on my age. I might be mixing it up with health insurance, because there was also a thing where my health insurance was going to change from being part of my family's plan to being something I had to do individually because of age, because I was just aging out of things. So it's hard to remember them all individually now. But one way or another, it was going to put me in debt, and I did not know if it was going to pay off. And also, it wasn't necessarily my calling, so I wasn't, like, massively inspired. In grad school, I was watching people do grad school and just being nervous about it in general, because people, like, it becomes less, at least as far as I could tell in geology, it becomes less about taking a series of classes the way that high school and college is, and it becomes more about, like, doing your own, like, self-driven big experiment. Like, I think that when you're on your way to getting your master's, like, you do your master's thesis, is what they call it, which is that you have to do, like, you basically do a study, and you basically get published. Like, you do a proper scientific study of some sort, and gather a bunch of data over the course of months and, or years, and do this huge thing, and get involved in all that, and, like, then defend it in front of a class, like, which like public speaking is always bad for me. I know, haha, because I do a thing where hundreds or thousands of people watch the things I do, which I try not to think about, for obvious reasons. But yeah, the idea of being in front of a class of people and trying to defend this thing I worked on for an entire year to a bunch of people is, like, a terrifying idea. It's up there with, like, why I wouldn't want to be a lawyer, for example. So, like, everything about doing the project seemed unappealing and terrifying, and also potentially life crippling on a monetary level, because any amount of debt I accrue is more money I have to try to figure out how to get back. And so, like, all of these elements stacking on top of each other are why I kind of didn't go through with getting master's or PhD from where I had before. Blah. Really don't have a calling. Once upon a time I thought I'd be a game designer, which is why I was taking computer science classes, because I didn't really know how else to go towards that idea. And then I both realized I don't like computer science and I don't like the games industry. I did not want to make computer science my everyday forever thing. And also every day we learned more about how terrifying the games industry is. God, what was the Waypoint article? What was the Waypoint article? Because they had a good one. They had a really good title recently. What was it? Oh yeah. Activision Blizzard reports record revenue as they fuck over 800 employees. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the pursuit of endless growth and endless profits. Yeah, that's an article. It's currently on the front page of Waypoint, posted by Patrick Klepek. Yeah, that's how the video game industry is fucked up. they do not value you as people, even though you make the entirety of the thing, which admittedly is part of what I'm going through anyway. Both with recent Patreon news and YouTube itself, like. Unfortunately, it's hard to escape that part of capitalism, is the idea that like so much of the overall economy is dominated by these corporations that just don't give a shit about you, even though you are the entire reason they exist. Like you think there'd be creators first on YouTube because the creators are what make all the content that is the entire reason that YouTube has an audience and can be a company, but they just don't give a fuck about us by and large. And it's not a matter of competition, because their competition would inevitably become the same bullshit. And there's the shit with Patreon where they were like, our generous business model where we pay out 90% of profits to these creators. I'm like, no, you don't get to say it like that. You don't get to say that you're being generous by giving us our own money. Like, you are basically PayPal. You are a service we use for people to send us money. We are generously giving you 10%. It's not actually true. We're giving them 5%, and the other 5% goes to processing fees because the banks and stuff involved with all the cards and everything. But like, Patreon's like $1 billion on Patreon. They're generously making like 5% of that, and they should be happy they're getting 5% of that, because they're not actually producing stuff. They just run the one service, and it's fucked up and greedy to think that they should try to be able to like scale up how much they take or anything like that, which so far they haven't announced anything. So far, hopefully they'll be shouted down and they'll realize how stupid they're being, which they did last time when we talked about their previous thing where they tried to change how charging happened, which was probably, that was almost certainly a trick like this one to like figure out how to make more money basically. And that's an issue that happens, is that we have these publicly traded companies and they have investors and so on. And those investors just require those companies to make more money, period, even if it makes no sense. And it sucks because it'll ruin a perfectly profitable company that is both doing fine on its own and is good for the people that it helps. Like, Patreon is a fantastic service that created countless jobs and helped so many people, and should continue to exist in the form that it exists in. And it would be really fucked up if it started fucking with this in particular, because they kind of squashed out some of the competitors like Subbable and stuff like that, which I think Subbable was created by the Vlogbrothers, which was the first instance of this idea of crowdfunded or subscription thing. I think Subbable is the first one I heard about, but Patreon became so big that Subbable merged with it, if I remember correctly. And it'd be really fucked up if Patreon was then sank the ship, because a lot of people depend on this, and also they are a perfectly profitable company, and the fact that they take a percentage means that they scale. They scale with how much money we all make. So when they talk about like when they talk about it being unsustainable or something, they're, as far as I can tell, blah blah blah, allegedly lawyer speak, some other shit. Don't take everything I say as fact, because maybe slander or something, I don't know. They seem to be lying when they say that it's unsustainable to do this. I mean, it's the definition of a scalable business system, because they take a percentage, and it's not like it's YouTube where they have to worry about it's not like YouTube, where YouTube has the problem where they have to pay for massive servers to not only store every video and play back every video, but also have multiple copies of every server. so that the videos can't be lost when hardware fails. Like, YouTube actually has a difficult thing to deal with, and they're doing that while trying to combat like controversies by any pick your controversy, like PewDiePie saying bad words on the internet, or ISIS videos being uploaded with Coke ads playing over them, like, which is what caused the adpocalypse. Like, they have those things to deal with while also dealing with the fact that, like, they're a free service that anyone can join, so countless people upload videos that will never have ads play on them because they'll never be watched. People upload hundreds of videos that will have 0 views or very few views because anyone can use the service, and they have to weigh the file sizes of that stuff versus the actual YouTubers that are creating actual revenue by having videos that are watched by people and stuff like that. So, like, they don't have an inherently scalable business model necessarily, and they do have to be careful and figure out stuff like YouTube Red, which is now called YouTube Premium, and combat controversies that reduce the people that will actually buy ads on the website and all these other problems. But Patreon, straight up, is just a service that deals with these charges, and that's it. And they take a percentage of how much everyone's making. So, like, they're the definition of scalable, and they're acting like they're not, and it's really fucked up. I just desperately hope that they're I just hope they're cowards, basically, and don't do it, which is what happened last time. Everyone shouted at them, and then they're like, just kidding. Because the thing about Patreon shaking confidence in their platform is that people leave it. Not only did the creators leave the service, but the people supporting the creators leave the service, and that happened last time when they changed this. When they changed the way that stuff was charged, immediately a lot of people like me lost hundreds of dollars because all these different patrons left the service. And this kind of thing I'm talking about here, like, it's kind of dangerous for me to even talk about this to you guys, because some of you might just leave before anything actually happens in response to this. But that's what I always do, apparently. But, like, that hurts them. They lose their money if people leave the service. So if it scares them enough, if people shout at them enough and it scares them, then they'll hopefully just realize that it's a mistake again. They won't learn their lesson. They won't be like, we should just be modest and just make our living the correct way and not fuck up a good thing. They're not going to learn that lesson. They're just going to learn, oh, that's not going to work. People are mad at us this time, so let's not do that. But you know what? That's the best you can expect from modern capitalism, unfortunately. And that's just the bummer of this whole thing. Sorry. That's the bummer of the system. It's like how every movie studio could make modestly budgeted movies that are modestly advertised, and then just have, you know, that they could just make profitable movies. Making a profitable movie or running a profitable movie company has been proven to be a pretty sustainable system. Same thing for game developers in general. Like, you can have budget projects that are modestly priced and modestly advertised and just turn a profit. Like, Blumhouse is good at that. Like, they make low budget movies. They're the ones that are doing, like, they do a bunch of horror movies, they do the Shyamalan movies and other stuff like that. You make budget things, and so long as, like, some of them turn a profit, you're good. But they don't want that. Like, Disney and everyone, they want the Star Wars empire, and they want the Marvel empire, and so, like, they make a movie like Solo, which frankly was garbage, like I said before, but it did make a lot of money, but it didn't make enough money. So now Disney is, like, retooling their entire approach to having, like, the spin-offs of the Star Wars movies in general, and they're changing how they're scared now, and they're changing everything. And I'm like, you made a movie that made hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's a disappointment. Or like how everyone will remember that news about how, like, Tomb Raider, the reboot, came out, and it sold like 7 million copies, and that was a financial disappointment. And you're like, wait, what? It's like one of the best-selling games of the entire year, and it's not enough for them. Like, it's like they're framing it like it didn't make its money back, and I'm like, you need to think about how you're doing things. But it's because game companies and Patreon and YouTube and movie companies and so many of these other systems, like, they're just they just need infinite numbers, and capitalism encourages infinite growth at all costs, and this just a really pointless destructive behavior that causes people to behave this way. And oftentimes they kind of don't have a choice, because the background elements of how the whole thing works with investors and whatnot trap them in this dangerous cycle, and it's just a bad time for everyone. And that's why these things keep happening. That's why, like, that kind of fucked up article will get posted where it's like Activision Blizzard reports record profits while they fuck over all their employees, and countless people are being fired from was it the Wall Street Journal, from BuzzFeed, from Blizzard. Like all these high up companies that are doing well are still firing people because not paying them makes them more money, and so on. A good company would not be all like, hey, we made Red Dead Redemption 2. It's the highest selling thing ever, but fuck you guys, you don't get to have your bonuses. Even though you worked massively overtime and everything. Like, it's a depressing system, and I'm just really happy not to be involved in that part of it, even though I'm in my own weird, scary part of it. At least nobody can just get bored and fire me because a number needs to change a little bit. It's a more complicated thing of, like, entire industries have to change how their entire websites have to change how they're functioning in order to threaten me, and even then I have to lose my audience, which is a whole other thing, because I can probably transfer my audience between different things to some extent. I'd be scared if YouTube went away, but if YouTube goes away, then we're talking about problems that are much larger than just me. And unfortunately, no one's safe. Like, you work for these companies and they'll just fire you, or you work for the government, which is supposed to be the most secure job ever, and they'll just decide, we're just not going to pay our employees for a month because an orange man wants to throw a tantrum over a wall. And instead of doing any sort of actual legislation or using any of the systems that are actually supposed to be used, he's going to hold the American people hostage and then pretend it's anyone's fault other than himself. Nice. Everyone, like, I talked about this before, but like, people are like, how could you do that job? It seems so insecure and dangerous. But like, everyone else's job seems terrifying and insecure and dangerous too. My dad's self-employed, and he broke his leg, and I told him for the longest time, like, you got to be real careful, you got to be planning for the future, because what are you gonna do if you can't run your job anymore because you're getting older, which he is, and he's self-employed with no employees, and he works at a shop where manual labor is the job, and he broke his leg and can't do his job. Like, that kind of shit happens, and that's it. Your job's fucked now. Like, there's no safe answers because the system doesn't support people in those situations. Capitalism. That's a conversation for another day, even though I'm having it today, I guess. But yeah, yeah. And the moment you bring up any potential solutions, people scream, people get roll Red Scare at you and freak out because you dare suggest that maybe there's some gaps in the system that people fall through. And it's not a matter, like, and people have internalized the idea that anyone who fails in the system is being lazy or they deserve it in some way. And they can't accept the fact that, like, actually some people just fail in the system because the system fails them, and they work their ass off every day while in debt doing multiple jobs, and it just wrings them out until they're old and can't do their job anymore, but don't have savings because they couldn't ever make more than enough to get by, and then they're in trouble long term, and there's no answer. There is no, and then this happens. Like, there's no, yeah. I don't like thinking about economic issues. They make me sad. Blah. Well, thanks for watching that go, guys. This is a fun downer note. Feel free to send in more questions, and I'll get to your questions next. Sorry if you sent a question in around like Thursday or Friday and I didn't get to it, because I'm recording this early because I normally put this video up on Saturday. It might go up a little early this week or something, but I normally put this up on Saturday, but I'm going to be at Marty's doing Twilight Imperium on Saturday. So, hey, that's the companion cube. Easter egg. So I need to record this in advance, so if anyone's sending in questions last minute, I'll get to them next week, because they haven't arrived yet from me in the past. Thanks for watching like always, guys, and I'll see you next time. Send me questions by clicking the little, like, ... under my name on Patreon. That's how you get to it, if you can't find it. Or just respond to a previous message. I'll find it, as long as it gets to me in some way. See you guys next time.